All right, welcome to Module 2 of this cooking course. So, now that you know the basics of food and kitchen safety, we can finally get into the fun part of the course. In this module, we will quickly learn about classic knife cuts and how to properly cut different vegetables, hold your knife, and be safe. Because this course is designed for sports performance athletes and the general population alike, meaning not my culinary professional peers, I will quickly go over the basic classic knife cuts for you to see, learn, and then I will highlight the ones that you might use the most. The art of mastering good knife cuts takes a lot of time. Only after 10 years of practice, I began to feel that my knife cuts were even and somewhat respectable. This is a skill that takes a long time to fine-tune, so don't be hard on yourself. So if your knife cuts are not perfect, don't worry. As long as they are somewhat even, they will support the sole reason behind having even knife cuts. And what is that reason, you may ask? That is to have your food cook as evenly as possible. For example, figure a large dice of sweet potato has more mass and will cook much slower than a small dice of sweet potato. So whenever a recipe calls for any specific size, remember that there is a reason behind it. Always try to cut your food as evenly as possible so your final product is evenly cooked. And it also presents a lot nicer, right? So, with that being said, let's talk about how to hold your knife. In order to have even knife cuts and to practice proper safety, most importantly, learning how to hold your knife is incredibly important. Think of your knife as an extension of your arm. To hold your knife, pinch the heel and the bluster, meaning the neck of the knife, with your index finger and your thumb, pinching on opposite ends like so. Then use your remainder 3 fingers, your middle, ring, and pinky, to wrap them around the handle of your knife, like so. Your palm should be resting on the top of a knife handle. Adjust the height of where you feel comfortable holding the knife, so that it's comfortable to you. Notice that I'm not holding my knife with my hand fully wrapped around the handle. This doesn't promote full control of your knife. However, by pinching it on the neck of the knife, that will provide tons more control of your knife. It's a little bit weird at first, but with time and practice, this will become second nature. Some people hold it a little bit above where I'm holding it, but I like to hold it here. Of course, with other knives like a serrated knife or a utility or paring knife, that can vary. What I just explained to you is mainly for a chef knife. But for a serrated knife, you can hold it by a handle like so. And with a paring knife, you can do that as well, or hold it like this. Adjust how you hold your knife based on what you're cutting and to your comfort. There are 2 ways to cut food. You can either move your food to your knife or move the knife to your food. You will typically use one method more than the other, but the most common practice and the safest is to move your knife to your food. As well, you will be using your opposite hand to guide your knife cuts by making a claw with your hand and using that claw to hold the item you are cutting in place, while guiding your knife with the edge of your knuckles. As you get better, both of your hands will be able to help you make your cuts as even as possible. Okay, now that you know how to hold your knife, proper knife safety, and how to guide your knife while cutting your food, let's go over some of the most basic common knife cuts. The most common dice knife cuts that are very similar to cut in practice, but vary in size are the following. Large dice, which is 3/4 of an inch, medium dice, which is 1/2 an inch, and small dice, which is 1/4 of an inch. And when I say 3/4, 1/2, or 1/4 of an inch, I mean the shape of the square all around. Now there are also other knife cuts that have very specific names. Something I haven't mentioned until now is that the French were the ones that organized kitchens and the culinary industry. And they did an excellent job at naming different knife cuts. When you think about squares, the best way of getting that square perfectly is by cutting a stick. That stick can vary in size. 3/4, 1/2 an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. And the variations of those sizes have very specific names, so let's review them real quick. First is the bâtonnet. The bâtonnet is a stick-like cut, 1/4 of an inch square and 2 inches long. This small dice then comes from the bâtonnet. So let's say with a sweet potato, we cut 1/4 of an inch thick, 2 inch long stick. Then we can use that stick to cut it into squares of 1/4 of an inch. That's how we get the small dice. Then comes the julienne. The finest long format cut of about 1/8 inch thickness and about 2-inch length. The smallest dice after the small dice, which comes directly from julienne, is an inch thick square, called a brunoise. Next we have a cut, which is the finest of cuts typically used for aromatics like garlic, shallots, onions, and is a much less precise cut as compared to the rest. This is called mincing. The finest cut typically used for leafy greens or herbs is called chiffonade. The sole use of this cut is for garnishes. Generally speaking, the medium dice, julienne, and mince will be the knife cuts that you use the most across the board and you see the most in recipes. Let's review how to make each of these using different ingredients. This is an example of all the knife cuts we just saw. We have the mince, which is super small cuts, and as we can see here, we have some very finely minced garlic. Then we have the chiffonade. Chiffonade basil here, as you can see, is very, very fine and it would be beautiful in a garnish. We have the large dice, which is a 3/4 of an inch cut. We have the medium dice, which is 1/2 inch of a cut. Then we have the bâtonnet, which is 1/4 inch square and 2-inch length. And from the bâtonnet, we have the small dice, which are 1/4 inch dices. Then we have the julienne, which is one of the most common knife cuts. It's 1/8 inch square with a 2-inch length. And then we get the brunoise, which is 1/8 inch dice. Last but not least, if a recipe calls for a large dice or rough cuts, this typically means that these vegetables will be used as a flavor building base for the recipe and will typically be cooked the longest. For this reason, things like mirepoix, which is an aromatic mix of celery, onions, carrots, which is also widely used across multiple recipes, does not require the cuts to be exact, hence the word rough. In this case, a large dice can apply as a proper cut. Now, the only reason why I'm explaining this to you is so that you can have better knowledge to understand what the dimensions of a cut are, so that when you're cooking and reading a recipe, you can more or less cut your vegetables to how the recipe is calling them for. I won't quiz you on these, so don't worry about it. But as a culinary student, I had some really tough tests of my cuts, and they had to be as close and even to one another as possible. Like I've mentioned before, only after 10 years of cooking professionally did I feel like my knife cuts were respectable. And today, I still continue to practice my knife cuts day in and day out to get them as close to perfect as possible. For you, however, know that even knife cuts promote even cooking. That is the importance and the sole reason of this lesson, of this module. Think about it. If you were to cook this carrot with this carrot, which one do you think would cook fastest and which one do you think might not cook fast enough? You got it right. This one might be undercooked by the time this one becomes mush. If we cook carrots or anything that is cut as evenly as possible, then you will promote even cooking. And therefore the experience of the dish will be that much better. Bottom line, even cuts, even cooking. And that's the end of this module. Feel free to review this section as much as you'd like, and please don't get frustrated if at first your knife cuts are not even. Thank you for making it to the end of this module. And give your knife cuts time. With a little bit of practice and patience, I assure you, you will get there.